So the last version of these global gap analysis will be Enrico from Finland, who is going to tell us his version.
Yeah, good afternoon everyone. Here's the fourth version of the story. Hopefully we're going to find some common ground at the end of the four presentations. I pretty much look forward to the discussion. I'm just actually would like to say that I'm here presenting on behalf of my group, which is led by Professor Atte Moilanen in Helsinki, and I would like to share the presentation with my colleague, Dr. Tuuli Toivonen, who is also in the room. So I think by now we shouldn't be spending too much time introducing Aichi Target 11, because I think even those who are not actually conservation biologists, not involved in the business, will know actually what it is about. So we want to actually identify priority areas for expansion of the protected area network to go to up to 17%. So in our study, you will see soon actually what we did. We tried to actually look at where the priorities for conservation action are to expand to 17%, how much species range we might be able to cover within that 17%. But also we tried to look at what could happen if we don't take action immediately by including a global land use change scenario in the analysis. So what would actually happen if we don't implement action immediately? And then also we tried to look a little bit at the political side. So would it be better to go for something which is coordinated and implemented globally, as if we could actually have a president of the world, or we'd rather actually go for implementation within each country? Okay, so which strategy would be better? So again, Stuart and some of the other people who presented before me have already mentioned some of the data that were used in previous assessments. We pretty much use the same data, with the difference that we didn't only focus on threatened species, but we tried to actually include all vertebrates that were assessed by IUCN. We included ecoregions in our analyses. As I mentioned, we looked at two different land use scenarios, one for the present condition and one for the future condition by year 2040, sort of like short-term interval to reduce uncertainty. We looked at what's currently represented within the protected area network globally, and then looked actually at how to expand to other areas. And we did another analysis by actually looking at what would be the difference if we were to identify the areas within each country separately, as opposed to actually look at a ideal world where we didn't have any borders. We implemented these in other software. We heard about Markson. With the software that we use is Zonation, which was actually developed by our boss, Professor Atte Moilanen over in Finland. It's a very different software compared to Markson, but actually I don't have time to tell you about it in detail. I would just actually like to invite you to read some of our manuals. We just released actually version 4 of Zonation, which was used for this analysis. And there's also, we're trying to make Zonation more understandable to practitioners. We also actually have like now a manual for that explains Zonation more quickly. And the software can be downloaded for free. Zonation produces two main outputs. One is a priority rank map, which you see at the top right of that picture, in which basically it's a raster map in which each cell has got a value included between 0 and 1, 0 being low priority for conservation and 1 being high priority. So in the map, you see the areas in red color are those that are top priority for conservation action. And then linked to the priority rank map, there's a performance curve that tell you actually at each proportion of the landscape what's the representation for your biodiversity features. Okay, so in this case, we want to see what will be represented at the 17%. So that's actually what you're going to be seeing in the next slides. So last night, a paper that my group worked on was published online in Nature. So it's a new paper that our group is very happy to have published in Nature. We also make some of the results available to the general public by a web page where the data are being visualized. There's some of my colleagues who are actually involved directly with that. I'm sure that they'll be happy to answer some questions about that if you want to. And so let's actually start. So let's actually start first and see, okay, where are priorities if we don't take action and by year 2040 we got land use change, okay? So there's not actually many differences. There are other papers which have been published looking at where the global priorities for action are. And so we actually see that the Southern Hemisphere, pretty much you get all the priorities. They are in Central South America, Africa, Southeast Asia. So we kind of actually know where those areas are, isn't it? I mean, we're not actually reinventing the wheel here. And this is actually when you would be sort of like identifying the areas globally without considering constraints at the country level. Then actually we did the analysis that looks actually at whether the countries would be actually implementing action independently. And there you see that if I go back to the previous image, that actually that kind of pattern changes a little bit, okay? We kind of get like this edge effect along the borders. But now, a map is a colorful map. It's telling a few things, it's a global analysis, so actually let's actually look at what is really represented in those areas, the 17%. So what we found was that currently within the global protected area network, we are representing 19% of the species ranges. If we were to expand to the 17%, we would actually increase that representation to 61%, which is actually a big jump if you think about it. Now, if we take into consideration that land use change might be changing things, if we don't take action immediately, that representation level could drop to 56%, and we would actually have on average like a range loss for all species of 12%. Now, if we are only now look at the map as a threshold in which we only present the 17% areas for protected area expansion, then we look at the two scenarios and the two analyses that we did, looking at the global analysis against the country-specific analysis. We see that there's not actually a lot of overlap in terms of the priorities, where the priorities are, but that's also a strong result because it tells us that actually those are the areas where we should really be looking at identifying the top priority areas. And again, they are found in the Southern Hemisphere, particularly South America, Africa, and Southeast Asia. Okay? But then again, let's actually see what would happen, okay, if we do the identification of the areas within each country. So the drop in representation, by not actually acting globally and collaborating globally, would be actually much bigger than the one with land use change only. Okay? There's a drop in representation of 22%. And this actually gets even worse when we look at the future land use scenario, in which the identification of the areas is being done within each country. Okay, so there's a 26% drop, and if we were to meet the same representation levels of the global priorities under the current land use allocation, we would need to actually protect almost 40% of the terrestrial land. Okay, so what does it mean? It means that if we don't take action immediately, and if we don't actually have like kind of a coordinated strategy for identifying those the priority areas, then we might end up having to protect more land or expanding that target to beyond 17% to sort of like be able to meet similar representation levels. Okay, and this is actually, yeah, okay, that's fine. I've actually gone faster than I thought. And this is actually so what we are, which then means that I could have actually kept some of the other slides that I removed yesterday before doing the presentation. But that's fine. So actually, that's where we are. This is actually some of like the main results from this Nature paper that was published yesterday. So now, is it all positive? Okay, I've been actually listening to a few presentations over the last couple of days, and Stuart was also mentioning like wide-ranging species yesterday. Okay. So we actually increase the representation levels if we take action now, and we bring them to almost 60% if we're able to implement any of these actions. But then what might happen actually to wide-ranging species? And this is another bit of work which is still unpublished, but which has been submitted to a journal and it's under review, in which we actually looked at some of the most charismatic and wide-ranging species globally. And what we found was that at the 17%, the representation was fairly low, about 38%. Okay, so if we wanted to go to a more adequate target, we might end up having to go beyond that 17%, 21% of the terrestrial land. And this would get worse if land use change was quickening. We would actually have to go well beyond and go to a 30%, okay? So what does it mean? Okay, so a 17% target is a great option that we have. It looks like there's political commitment to actually get to establish new protected areas. It might be that if we don't take immediate action, land use change and obviously also climate change is another major threat. It might be, we might be losing some opportunities. We know that there's no president of the world, although I'm pretty sure there will be a couple of countries that would be happy to have the president of the world. But anyway, it's very difficult. It would be very difficult to coordinate this action globally. But at the same time, actually, it would be one of the best options to be able to achieve higher representation levels. And at the same time, we send a warning message, meaning that 17% is great, but most likely we're going to need new, different actions to be able to maintain species outside of the protected area network. So actually, creating protected areas is one action, but other actions are going to be needed to maintain those other species outside of the protected areas. So before I conclude, and I think I'm almost there, I would like to thank a few people, especially our boss, Ate Maulana, who could not make it here, Federico Montesino-Puzols, who's moved to a new job. He was part of our group, but he's been a key person. I wouldn't be here presenting without all the work that Fede has done. There are other 3 people from my group who are here in the room, and I'm sure I'm going to be able to address all the tricky questions that I'm going to get in a couple of minutes. And our funders, and here are some contact details if you want to be in touch and have some copies of the manuals or the new paper that has come out last night. Thank you very much for listening.